This is the fourth in a series on the power and psychology of language. When it comes to using language to try to shut people down, to falsely portray them as some terrible person or monster that doesn't deserve to be heard, who can't bring their stats, their facts, their evidence, their reality to the table, it is so prevalent when it comes to men's issues or men's health issues. I speak on the topic many times in my classes. Now, I have standing there because I'm the instructor, and people know who I am, and they know that I'm going to bring reality, not ideology. They know I'm not just going to be talking about men's issues, but about women's issues, boys, girls, non-gender. Factor gender out of the equation if you can. They know I'm going to do that. When I give podcasts, same thing. I'm very fair and balanced. I gave a talk at the University of Toronto last month about men's issues. Now, if this were a few years ago, it would have been shut down because this did happen a couple of years ago, several times when people tried to talk about these issues. Because certain people with evil ideologies don't want the facts to be heard. So in this video, I'm going to talk about some of those facts, which I hope some people will, look up and try to promote, because it's a good exercise. If you want to try to, learn how to be able to deal with really difficult issues, to be able to do it in a way where you're composed, you can control yourself, and you can get your point across, this is an amazing topic to try to do. And I'm not trying to say go out there and, and try to grab zealots and try to, promote a cause. I'm not saying that. I'm saying practice in order to be able to be a true critical thinker and to use language honestly. Because the opponents are the most dishonest and, again, sometimes evil people you're going to find. So as soon as you say men's issues, I know this from experience. So if I'm writing to a newspaper, I'm one of the commenters online, or if I tweet, I'm immediately labeled with, as I'm sure you can guess, misogynist, hateful person, or men's rights activist, MRA. And if I were a woman, I would also be called a traitor to my species, a self-loathing female, or something like that. All of these designed to shut people down. So as soon as you try to bring out stats, no, just use the label so that no one else has to hear the reality that you're trying to bring. If you've heard my other videos or seen them, you know that I try to counter this with verbal judo. Instead of simply saying that's not what I said, I ask questions. So please review the video to make sure that you can see the techniques on getting people to be, to hold them to account. Don't just let them throw labels at you. Don't just let them shut you down. Force them to back up their words. And as I say in those videos, chances are the person you're talking to is not going to budge. They may be an ideologue. They might be very rigid. They might have some hateful agenda themselves. They might be the true oppressors. So you're not going to get anywhere with them. But if you can reach out to the people around you, then you have a chance. Now, there's just several ways to reach out. If it's face to face, then have the discussion. And here's something you should do. Research has shown this. Instead of just throwing out your questions or your topics to the people around you, single somebody out. Try to find someone who looks like they're the most engaged or they have some standing within the group. Ask them directly. Do you agree with this person that what I said equates with misogyny? Do you agree that when I said blah, 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 it means I am hateful? And never just say what I said. You have to specifically say it. Hold them to account. Force them to contemplate the actual words that you're disseminating. And then get them to back up whatever they say and use the tactics I've spoken about in the other videos. That's one thing. If it's online, again, directly address them. Don't just say, hey, does anybody feel this? You specifically take one or two people and force them to answer the question. Of course, you always do it respectfully. It's always respectful. Now, we know, research shows this, that if one person can somewhat turn a little bit, change a bit publicly, other people are more willing to do so. We are sheep, all right? All it takes, though, is one person to lead the pack, and then these sheep will kind of follow suit. Maybe not everybody, but more people will. So don't try to just randomly reach out to people. Grab one or two people. That's very important. Now, when it comes to this MRA label, talk about power of language. Even perhaps more so than misogynist. MRA carries with it so much other, just vile feelings. And when people think of an MRA, they usually think of one of two people. Either they think of this pathetic loser who either, lives in his basement with his parents, or, is divorced, lost his kids, can't have a job, blah, blah, blah. They just really want to denigrate him. Or they think of the MRA as this really scary, psychopathic, hateful person who abuses women, has them locked up in his basement. Now, the fact is, there are some people within the MRA movement who are dangerous. They are psychopaths. They are scary. They truly do hate women. Maybe they're actual misanthropes. They hate all of society. But the fact is, these same types of people also exist in other movements like feminism, Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ, etc. In any movement, you're going to have these fringe elements. And so it's so disingenuous, and I'm going to go back to the word of evil, to try to paint everybody who might agree with some of these points with the same brush, try to tarnish them and say, yep, you're MRA, you have a hateful agenda, and we don't have to hear you. Again, it's using language to shut people down. That one simple term just obliterates anything you have to say. So when someone tries to use that term against you, you can try to deny it like I've tried. I mean, I've on Twitter and other places, I've just linked them to my podcasts, which are very pro-woman. But they're also pro-men, pro-boys, pro-girls, etc. Okay? It doesn't matter. They still say MRA, MRA. So once again, I give up trying to convince them, but I try to compel other people to hear what I have to say. And in doing so, you need to use the term, we're talking about men's issues here. Specifically, you need to use the term, it's not a zero-sum game. Now, I had Robert Samry as my guest on my podcast, and he used that term as well. So basically, what it means is, if I say, for example, and this is a true stat, 40 to 50% of victims of domestic violence are men. That in no way means that 50 to 60% are not women. Doesn't mean I'm denying it. It doesn't mean I'm minimizing it. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about it. It just means this is true and this is true, and they are not mutually exclusive. It's not a zero-sum game. We can deal with both of them. Talking about one doesn't take away from or deny or negate the other. And you have to stress that. You can either say it explicitly or, using verbal judo, say, how does my talking about this stat in any way detract from this other stat, this other reality? Force the person to try, because who knows what they're going to say. But whatever they say, as I said before, say, okay, I get it, but how does this, and repeat it. Now, when it comes to using language honestly, you need the nuance. You can't just stop it at 40 to 50% of victims of domestic violence are men. Because, as I said in another video, domestic violence now covers yelling at your partner. Not even threatening them, although that's domestic violence as well. But just having a verbal argument with them can get you labeled as, domestic violence. So when we say that 40 to 50% of the victims are men, people are going to say, well, yeah, that just means that, maybe their partner yelled at them. And if they know their stats, and by the way, these stats come from the Government of Canada website. These are 2009 and 2014. So if they know their stats, or if they want to Google it, they will also find that women are 2 to 3 times as likely as men to be victims of the most severe types of violence, like choking, near death, beating really badly, or are afraid for their lives. So let's be honest. Don't be disingenuous. Mention that as well. I always tell people, when you hide things, when you leave things out, if someone's smart enough to look into them, or if they're tenacious enough, it discredits you. So have the faith of your convictions and bring the real reality, not just a smidgen of it. Because if they come back at you with that, and if you have your stats, you can say, for example, that the same Canadian government website showed that in 2014, twice as many men as women reported that their partner bit, slapped, kicked, or hit them with an object. Men, twice as many men versus women. It's a real stat. Notwithstanding everything I'm saying here, the fact is, if you do your due diligence and check out, for example, StatsCan websites, you will see a number of tables and charts, such as these ones that I'm showing now, that do show that women do comprise the majority of victims of domestic violence across the age groups and across provinces. Yet, in the same sites, they say things such as, and I quote, in 2014, equal proportions of men and women reported being victims of spousal violence during the preceding 5 years, 4% respectively. This translated into about 342,000 women and 418,000 men across the provinces. Now, why these contradictions? Well, as mentioned, it really depends on how you define domestic violence. And people are going to, they're going to quote mine, they're going to find stats that support their agendas. And it's disingenuous. And that's why I try to be as open and honest as possible, which is why I'm showing you these tables and charts. Because, as I said earlier, the fact is women are the vast majority of those who report being seriously injured or killed by a partner. And some people might say, what about the fact that some of these partners are women? That's true too. We can't deny that women abuse other women. But statistically speaking, lesbian relationships are only a tiny proportion of these relationships being reported. So it's not as if the imbalance of women versus men as victims of domestic violence, at least the more serious types, are due to lesbians, because they're only a small number. So again, being open and honest is the most important thing. These are the kind of things that you're trying to promote. And again, I'm not saying to promote a cause, but it's to get people to open their eyes and say, stop listening to this ideology. Don't just say domestic violence is only a man on woman issue. It's woman on woman. It's woman on man. It's man on man. Take the gender out of it. It's humans. And if you really want to go there, then you look at the other stat, which is, sadly, about 1/3, anywhere between 33 to 39% of boys and girls are victims of various types of violence. Physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, all types of violence, but extremely high rates of physical and sexual. As mentioned earlier, when it comes to sex differences in victims of domestic violence, different tables, charts, and stats say different things. So, for example, here you can see that it looks like girls are the vast majority of victims of family violence. Yet, in this table here, it shows that the numbers are essentially equal, and sometimes a bit higher for the boys. So, like I keep saying, anybody can find any stat to show what they want to say. So just randomly throwing out these stats is not sufficient. Be prepared to either be surprised when someone says, but what about this? And if it's true, if it's valid, concede the point. Or, better yet, be prepared with your own data. Do your due diligence and don't just look for things that confirm whatever belief or bias you already have. Look for disconfirming evidence. That's what a true critical thinker does. So to try to make this a genderized issue, to use language, talk about women's issues, girls, females, and to say that when someone tries to bring up the reality that this affects boys and men as well, somehow makes them a hateful person. Look at what you're doing. Look at how language is being used to try to manipulate the narrative. You need to stand up to that. And I'm telling you right now, you will get such negative reactions. People don't want to hear it. So have your phone ready, have Google ready, have stat sheets ready, just to show them. And again, I'm not trying to promote some ideology here. I'm trying to get people to be able to deal with these very controversial and sensitive issues. Their schemata get triggered left, right, and center, whether it's MRA or domestic violence or something else like that. And they don't want to hear the realities. So it's your job to try to go in there and promote the real reality. Now, along those lines, ask people, how many shelters do you think there are? If 40 to 50% of victims of domestic violence are men, how many shelters are there for men of this type of violence in Canada? The answer, 0. There was one for a little while. It was self-operated by a man who didn't get any funding by the government. He was running himself. I believe he went bankrupt and he killed himself. Committed suicide. And when it comes to suicide, another stat that you can bring up. And again, I'm talking about language, but this is all about language because it's getting people to be able to hear what you have to say. If you can get these stats out there and get people to digest it, to think about it, maybe to do their own research, then you can, maybe have this chain effect and get other people to promote critical thinking. So The fact is, women might be 2 to 3 times more likely than men to attempt suicide, but we know that men are about, at least in Canada, 3 times more likely, 3.5 times, sometimes even up to 4 times more likely than women to actually kill themselves. Other stats, I mean, these are on different websites, but again, this is not some MRA website. This is a government website. And if people are going to say, well, we don't believe in government stats because they're trying to promote some agenda, really, in Canada, you're going to say they're trying to promote a male-dominated agenda? Not happening, not in Canada. So again, I'm hoping that you'll hear this video, you'll feel motivated to try to speak to people and just, again, present some of these ideas. It's not about a pro-men's movement. It's about getting people to